Well, it's kind of the same sort of crazy environment in Washington right now, where you never know what works and who's on case and who's in charge. So it should be a fitting start to our program. I'd like to welcome everyone to this session, which will be something that we're going to start by asking a few questions and having some dialogue, but we also want you to ask questions. And so there'll be someone roaming around with a microphone when we get to the audience question part, or if anything strikes your fancy while we're going along, please raise your hand and ask questions of our distinguished panelists here. Those of you who have been to this session in the past know that we have historically had two leading representatives of the nation's largest farm organizations, American Farm Bureau Federation and the National Farmers Union. So I'm very pleased today to share with you that we have someone who used to be with the American Farm Bureau Federation. Mary Kay Thatcher is now the lead for federal government relations at Syngenta. But everybody in Washington knows Mary Kay as really one of the top experts on farm policy in our nation's capital. So we're still going to count on her to provide some Farm Bureau perspective, but also some of her own. And then right next to me on my left is Rob Larew, who also shouldn't be a stranger to many of you because of his long experience on the House Ag Committee and working for members on the House. He is currently the Senior VP of Public Policy and Communications for National Farmers Union. So we're going to explore some of the topics that different organizations are supporting right now in terms of the Farm Bill, in terms of trade. And one of the hot topics of this morning, did everybody in here listen to Secretary Perdue? Okay, well you probably saw that. Yay! You saw that Secretary Perdue was quite forceful with his comments this morning to let you know that he is unequivocally supportive of the renewable fuels standard. And he seemed a little heated about some of the press coverage. I don't know why that could happen for a politician, but he seemed a little concerned. And as those of you who are subscribers know, we wrote about the concern that was really coming from you. There are so many corn growers who talked to us yesterday about these White House meetings that have been going on, about whether Secretary Perdue is as supportive as he should be in meetings where he's butting heads with the likes of EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt and Senator Ted Cruz and Senator Pat Toomey. So I wanted to just start by exploring your perspective, Rob and Mary Kay, about what was really the take home from you of the Secretary's message today to the audience.
Well, I think that he was obviously sincere about wanting to support renewable fuels, but I think it was probably good that it came up, and I would say that I think that just because that's what he said this morning, we should keep the pressure on to continue to work on not just RFS, but the RINs and the export market and those kinds of things, because as many of you know, things in Washington change quickly. We had President Trump come to the Farm Bureau annual meeting about the 5th or 6th of January and talk about crop insurance and how positive it was, and a couple weeks later, he changed his mind. So we know that this president tends to have moments of changing his mind, and I think it's imperative that we all really keep the pressure up to make sure that doesn't happen.
Yeah, I mean, I just would echo a lot of what's already been said, and that is the fact that this was one of the first thing that the Secretary brought up. Anytime that you are going to have RFS discussed in the White House, I mean, it's on everybody's radar screen, right? And so we're right there watching to make sure that there's nothing that we're missing in all this. And so although we are hearing very strong, unequivocal support for the RFS, digging below the layers there, what else is going on there? We know that there are political aspects to this, right? That's because of the very nature of the game here and the fact that you had those senators in there. Senator Cruz, who's been advocating for deep reforms in the RFS and for capping RINs, was in this meeting. He's up for election. We certainly don't think that he's at risk in Texas, but the fact that there is an election and so forth always gives room for a lot of talks and perhaps some deal making. And so keeping that pressure on is absolutely critically important.
So one of the things that Secretary Perdue said, especially during the press conference, is that he is still willing to be educated on this topic, especially as you drill down, as you mentioned, into the RINs. What is it? Is there a compromise between all these disparate interests where you've got the oil industry and you've got the ethanol industry, you've got the biodiesel folks? Is there middle ground that would represent a win-win for all parties involved, or should it just be only status quo?
There might be a middle ground, Sarah, but I don't know what it is, and I don't think we would want to go there yet. I think we have a very strong argument for what the RFS has done for agriculture. I think we have a very strong argument about, unfortunately, the situation that most producers are in right now. And, you know, you compare the price of corn with what's going on in oil, and I just think it's imperative that we keep that up. I mean, it could be pretty devastating if we lost RFS or capped RINs or some of those things. So even if there is a middle ground, I don't think it's time to go there yet.
No, certainly some of the things that's been talked about in the press are going to be part of that compromise dialogue. But again, I think Mary Kay is absolutely right. There's a very strong case to be made here, not only because of the intent of the RFS, the fact that it was supposed to be driving additional production and infrastructure in biofuels, and it's doing exactly that. It's working as expected, and it is needed now more than ever. We do know that there will be another meeting in the White House with the president tomorrow. We know that we understand that there's going to be about 5 or 6 folks on either side of this issue in there. No trade associations are invited. So it'll be curious to see, obviously, what comes out of that dialogue. I know that the issue of RIN transparency is another one beyond the export issue and RVP. All those things are obviously going to be talked about.
And, you know, keep in mind, Sarah, and everybody knows this, but just because the Secretary says it, you know, EPA Administrator Pruitt is from an oil state, presumably is at least considering at some point going home and running for re-election, and that's somebody, too, that has to be convinced that we're on the right track.
I don't think it ever hurts to remind the White House also that 95% of the counties that have some biofuel production out there went for President Trump.
Well, that really underlies a greater political sort of landscape question, and that is there are so many people in farm country that voted for this president, and part of it was because his most consistent campaign message for agriculture was, I support the RFS. In fact, it was one of the few that we could say, you know, hang our hat on. He said that consistently. So if there would be a fallout from that in a compromise, do you think voters would actually turn away, and that this might be the start of that blue wave that so many Democrats are starting to anticipate that they could count on in farm country?
I think it'd be a big wake-up big wake-up call in farm country. I mean, you know, most people predict the loss of RFS or the capping of it, or, you know, RIN sort of starting that ball rolling could be, I don't know, 40, 50 cent hit on corn prices with where they are already. I think that would be a pretty strong hit in corn country to just ignore.
You know, I think, you know, we talk about RFS with this particular issue, but I think touching on that, obviously behind all this is the rural economy, right, the farm economy, and that, as much as anything, right, is going to be driving what that reaction is, whether or not this administration is fulfilling some of the promises that they have out there at large, not only on RFS, and we'll see what happens in the midterms.
Well, we do have some interesting situations with this midterm. You know, the last time when about a third of the Senate was up, it was the highest risk for the Republican Party. This time, out of 33 Senate seats, 25 of them are held by Democrats and only 8 by Republicans. We've also got 36 governor seats that are up, and so we've got a lot of things in flux here for a lot of rural Democrats. Do you anticipate that there's going to be enough turnover, Rob, in some of these Senate races, especially North Dakota, where your membership of NFU is very strong? Heidi Heitkamp is, you know, now facing a very strong challenge from Kevin Cramer, both of them very popular in the state. Do you see the Senate flipping?
I think it's a very real possibility, right? I mean, first of all, we have razor-thin margin right now. In several parts of the country right now, the president is not polling well. So I think that this only helps what are already strong incumbent Democratic senators. So I think that the possibility is real, but even if it does flip Democrat, it's still going to be a very tight margin. And for that, it was still going to require anything that's moving through the Senate to get that, sometimes elusive 60 votes.
Okay.
And I think, I think the House has a better chance of flipping than the Senate does, but it's way too early to say that. And I think that, but I do think it's already playing into what's going on because, you even see somebody like Jim McGovern talking about, well, if they screw up food stamps too badly, then maybe I'll just think we could do a better farm bill. He's saying when the Democrats take the House. So, I think that that's going to be a card that will be played often on all kinds of issues, but on farm bill and other kinds of issues this year, too.
You can kind of see the campaign ads coming up already, can't you? Of all the different images that have been captured at different events and how that'll play out. And for all you lucky folks who like to watch TV, just kind of count on steady stream of campaign ads in those 25 or 33 states, at least, where the Senate's members are up. So one of the things you mentioned is Farm Bill. So let's talk about some of the specifics then. The Secretary mentioned today that, work is progressive quite rapidly in the House. We might have, I think many of you know, we're going to perhaps have action here in a couple more weeks, mid to late March in the House side. So we've got the Secretary playing kind of a guidance analytical role rather than trying to be out front with the Farm Bill and any specific policies. But there are a lot of different topics that are coming up from organizations here representing corn, soybeans, sorghum, and wheat. One of those is just what we should do with the commodity title. We got some wins in the budget bill for cotton and dairy. Where's the money going to come from for any other changes that we might want to see, like fixing the agricultural risk coverage program so it's more consistent between counties, or I know the wheat growers would like to see an increase in reference prices under the price loss coverage. Where do we go for that?
That's a really great question. And most of the commodity groups, general farm organizations, much earlier were pushing, right, for additional money into the Farm Bill. And then slowly that has evolved into what we're hearing from the House and the Senate is one of there is no new money. And in fact, they have been working very hard, respectively, to make sure that there are not additional cuts being made through the budget process. And so far, they've been relatively successful there. But of course, the fact that we're starting off with no additional money, with the exception of this, the cotton and dairy pieces that just came in, we already have programs in there that have no funding. So we are starting in a deficit already. From our members' point of view, we want to find additional resources out there, but it is pretty tough. I think what you are likely to see in Title I is a whole lot of the same, if you will, because of the fact that there's not much money there. You will see, we would like to see some adjustments in the reference prices as well. We think wheat's not alone in making sure that we can get reference prices that more accurately reflect the cost of production. And obviously there's a lot of evidence out there of disparities in ARC and how to possibly adjust the formula to make it better reflect sustained periods of low prices. But I think that's really what you're going to see in Title I, at least.
And I think most people have come to the conclusion that there really isn't going to be much new money, and that you almost could go home and say it was a success if you didn't get your funding cut. But certainly I think looking at the ARC program and what can be done, looking at PLC and seeing what the equity ratios are there are going to be important. But I think one of the things that is really I think somewhat set in people's minds this year is that you're not going to take conservation money to pay for commodity and crop insurance programs, and you're not going to take nutrition money to pay for conservation. I mean, people I think are generally, working in their line of what funding is there. So if you're going to look at changes in commodity programs, it seems to me you kind of got two choices. It's commodity programs or crop insurance. and the same for conservation, and the same for nutrition.
So the same buckets.
Yep.
So Rob, as someone who worked as staff director for Colin Peterson, and you've been in the, in the ball, so to speak, of these tough negotiations over who gets what money and what level of funding.
Have I pointed out that I'm really glad I'm right here right now?
Well, I don't see any scars there on the back, but I'm sure you've been through enough of those battles to earn several. So what kind of message do you give at this point in time to a farm organization like yours? If you're a staff member, do you say, don't even show up at my door unless you've got an offset? Or?
Well, I don't think there can even be a conversation, right, if there isn't an offset. I mean, unless it's an idea that by some chance one of the key members is very much interested in, hadn't thought of before, and so they go looking for the offset. But I think, the House, at least right now, can be described as they have entered this phase of, not Catholic, but when the Vatican is they're doing the Pope selection and you're waiting for the smoke here, because they are not soliciting for new ideas right now. They are very much have most of their provisions already written. Most of that has not been shared, obviously, and they are just trying to pull all those final pieces together as they prepare for a markup in the next few weeks. So I don't think, at least in terms of the House, that that's an opportunity that exists right now.
And I bet Rob agrees that I haven't been in a meeting on Capitol Hill in 6 or 8 months to talk about an idea that might cost $100 million or might cost $4 billion without the question immediately coming back, how are you going to pay for it?
Mm-hmm. So one of the program changes that your former boss says he does have an offset for is an increase in the Conservation Reserve Program cap by then restricting rental rates on CRP lands. How do you think that's going to roll in committee? I mean, do you think that's a given right now, that if there is a sufficient offset on increasing the acreage, that'll be accepted most widely by the committee, or is it going to be fought off by some of the grain and feed folks who don't care for that kind of expansion?
Yeah, well, I haven't seen any language, so I think we first have to see that. But based upon what I've seen in the press and some conversations I've had, I mean, I think obviously what they're doing is looking for some additional flexibility in the contracts. They're possibly taking away some of the specific practices that could be applied on top of that. So, in addition to rental rates, the real question I don't think is necessarily in the committee. I think in the committee, the ranking member probably has the support that he needs to get that done. The bigger question is whether or not there would be any changes sought on the floor or in the Senate.
I agree. And I think, I mean, certainly the rumor has been that Colin wants to pay for it by saying rental rates for CRP ground couldn't exceed 80% of normal rental rates. I mean, I don't have any economic statistics, but that seems kind of low to me, especially in certain parts of the country. So I think that's something that we all ought to take a look at. And I think one of the other questions that's likely to come up on CRP is we've got a fairly high percentage. I think it's around 30% of the ground in CRP that's already been in it either 20 or 30 years. And so the questions are starting to be raised on how long do we leave that ground in CRP? I can take you to a lot of states where the government's already paid for the ground once already by having a farmer have it in there 25 years. And, when you think about some of the issues that some of our opponents bring up, I think that's something they're going to look at. So there are issues, I think, that we have to think about from a fairly high-level philosophical approach. And lastly, I would just say that I hope we're not doing this because we think it's a great supply management program. I mean, I've heard that, and I just don't see how, even if you went from 24 to 30 million acres in a global economy, how you get much supply management out of 6 million more acres. So.
And Mary Kay, when you go home to your farm in Iowa, do you hear much from younger farmers who are saying, we've got to stop some of these high rental rates, it's prohibiting access for us getting onto the land?
A lot. Every meeting I went to, that was the thing that came up from young farmers is I tried to rent this land and I got outbid. in the CRP, and that especially came up from states that have pollinator programs where, you know, they were giving you extra incentives. I know I had one guy from Iowa tell me that he tried to get 300 acres and they outbid him for $370 an acre cash rent, or for put it in the pollinator program. He said, how can you ever hope to get land and to make money doing that? So we've made, the administration's made some strides, I think, on the pollinator program, but especially I think something has to be done there.
Rob, you've got a lot of young members in NFU now that are coming up. Do you hear that complaint?
Oh, we certainly hear that complaint from some. I mean, the issue of access to land in general, you know, even outside of CRP, is just probably the number one issue that we hear from young and beginning farmers.
Do you hear any concerns with access to credit? I know that there seem to be so many more people now that are perhaps falling out of the straight commercial lanes for credit and are maybe going back to more FSA forms of credit. Are you starting to hear more folks saying we need to have more money allocated through USDA lending programs?
We certainly do hear that, and I think that there are probably a couple ways to try to address that. I mean, just trying to straight out get more money in there is probably a bit of a challenge, but there are conversations going on, particularly in the Senate on this. There is legislation being worked on right now to also give the Secretary a little bit more discretion if they run up against a limit, so that if it takes an act of Congress to get more money in there, that the Secretary has a little bit of a cushion to meet the most pressing needs until additional money can be put in.
And I think there's been a bunch of discussion too, Sarah, about, you know, those the loan limits, the amount per farmer ought to be increased. And you know, I think we ought to be really careful about that, because if we don't make sure we get more money, then if you increase the limits, all you're going to do is help fewer farmers and fewer small and beginning farmers, more large farmers and fewer small and beginning farmers. So they kind of got to go hand in hand, I think, to make much sense.
So I'm going to keep asking questions because I'm a journalist, and you can just turn me loose up here, but I'd like to hear some of yours. So if you have a question, please raise your hand and they'll bring a microphone around to you. Josh is waving there in the back, so hail him down, and I'll ask a couple more, but I hope that some of you will get your questions asked of these guys while they're here to give you all the key insight from Washington, D.C. I want to talk about one other Farm Bill question, and this is a little bit in the weeds, but I understand on the House side there's a consideration of combining the Conservation Stewardship Program and the Environmental Quality Incentives Program into one lump conservation program, and perhaps in that process take out the carve-out that is currently there, carving out a big chunk of the funds and EQIP for livestock. What are your thoughts on that? Good idea, bad idea? Does it make a difference?
I think, you know, removing the carve-out for livestock would be a very bad idea. You know, there's very few things that the livestock sector actually asks for, and certainly that exemption, that 60% markup of EQIP is one of them. Now, this year, the livestock industry is asking for a significant amount of money for foot and mouth disease vaccine bank and potentially for some disease management programs, and so they are asking for additional funding. But I suspect that the livestock industry would say, "Hey, especially the cattlemen, this is maybe our number one or number two priority." So, you know, and I think I don't know enough about how they intend to potentially on the House side combine the two. I would say that, you know, I think farmers everywhere seem to love all kinds of conservation programs, but certainly when I go to the country, the one that I hear most about is Protect EQIP. And the importance of it in making sure that they can meet some of the regulations that come their way.
Yeah, I think that this is intriguing, this idea of pulling these two programs together. First of all, it kind of combines two elements here, if you will, from my kind of political eyes. And the first of that is the fact that in the last Farm Bill, conservation title from all parties, both the House and Senate majority and minority, work together to try to combine a lot of conservation programs into far fewer, right? The other piece of this is that, so this would be continuing that trend. The other piece of this, of course, is that CSP was originally a product of the Senate. It's always enjoyed much more support out of the Senate. So we will have to see exactly what it entails when you combine these things, what practices are still allowed, which ones are not. The idea of removing or reducing the carve-out for livestock is probably less of a concern for us. When we look at where those contracts are currently going and the size of these contracts and so forth, we don't necessarily see this as inherently a problem, but I'm sure that the committee staff are looking at all those details, so we'll be curious when it comes out.
We're all waiting for a lot more details, right? How it will work. So last Farm Bill question on my plate is the safety net that is most popular for farmers whenever we go to meetings, and crop insurance. I remember talking to Representative Peterson at the Missouri Farm Bureau meeting in December, and where he said he's more concerned about potential killer amendments on crop insurance this year than ever before. And then he was careful to say, but it depends how it's written. And I said, so how would it be written? Well, I don't want to tell anybody because that might give them a clue how to write it, which is just always the wonderful part of asking him questions. But we've already seen some damaging amendments get passed in the Senate during the last Farm Bill. Should we expect more of the same, that there'll be attempts to add adjusted gross income limits or premium subsidy caps? What's in store for crop insurance?
Well, I think there's going to be a lot of at play with crop insurance, but there's also a lot of pieces of this that, we'll just have to wait to see how it all plays out. Obviously, I'm mainly a creature of the House, so looking at the House right now, you have a large number of members who have no knowledge of crop insurance, have no understanding of the value of it and so forth, but do have other provisions of the Farm Bill that they're very interested in. For a lot of those members, that's SNAP, that's food stamp program, right? Which is also one of those messages that farm groups collectively have been very adamant about, needs to be maintained, very strong and so forth. Then on the other side, you have the House Freedom Caucus, the ultra-right, who are not a big fan of, first of all, of SNAP, but also of a lot of the farm programs, and certainly would love to gut crop insurance. So I think that there is a link here in some ways that we have to be very mindful of. I think these amendments are likely to come up. We'll have to see how they are packaged. But if a bill comes out and is rolled out that takes a big swipe, looks for deep reform in the food stamp and the SNAP provisions and so forth, I think you could begin to see additional pressure in the crop insurance space for, in their eyes, probably just arbitrary cuts to look at that. And even though every time that we had a presidential budget come our way up on Capitol Hill, the mantra, right, is that it's ignored. You don't look at that and so forth. And yet, with this president, on the one hand, coming out early this year in support of crop insurance, and then just a few weeks later, laying out many of the same pieces that some of the ultra-right groups out there are advocating for, that may have an effect, right, in garnering support for those kinds of provisions, whether it's, gutting underwriting gains, reducing subsidies, all these things which would critically damage, obviously, the most important risk management tool that we have in the Farm Bill.
And I would just echo what Rob said. I think I would be the most concerned about what happens with the SNAP program and nutrition and farm programs. I think that's the biggest hurdle we face. But when we're thinking about ag programs, without a doubt, crop insurance has the biggest target on its back and will continue to have. I mean, it has had since we did away with direct payments, and that will continue. I think you can look back at history and see what's likely. And if you look back at the last Farm Bill, Dick Durbin offered an amendment to reduce the premium subsidies from an average of 62% to 47% that the government pays. And we fought that diligently. We didn't start at the last minute and say, oh, there's an amendment on the floor. It was something that lots and lots of people in this room worked on for weeks and months. And we lost that vote 33 to 66. Keep in mind you have to have 60 votes to prevail on those things. So we're a long ways when you think about 33 votes is all we got to go with us. I think without a doubt, whether it's the House or the Senate, it's not going to happen in committee, I don't think. The real stresses are going to be on the floor. But boy, now is the time to be talking to your members of Congress about your visits with your lenders and or your neighbors' visits. And if you can't get lending because you don't have a viable crop insurance product, how's that going to play out? It's important to talk about that as a safety net that's in trouble.
I guess I would just add here that although it can sometimes, when we talk about crop insurance, particularly on Capitol Hill, it is sometimes only seen through the lens of the primary commodities, right? The commodities represented in this room. And yet, obviously, crop insurance has policies that help support the production of hundreds of crops out there. Not only that, but the last Farm Bill, with the addition of the whole farm revenue, as well as additions and changes to NAP and other programs to help graduate, if you will, beginning and new farmers into building up a level of understanding with crop insurance, that those are the type of practices that I think the more we can build our base of support out there for this risk management tool.
So suggested that we should keep broadening out the crops and the commodities. We're going to have dairy covered pretty soon.
I was going to say, that's going to happen anyway. I mean, there's a new policy that Farm Bureau just developed, and RMA and USDA just approved it to do a dairy revenue product that's very much like a corn, wheat, soybeans, sorghum revenue product. You have to do all kinds of surveys, and it came back very positive that people are very interested in that. And, I think that's a great thing for the dairy industry because it's going to offer them some revenue coverage that they've never had before. Really what they've had is gross margin that hasn't worked all that well. But I think it's also great for the crop insurance industry because now we can add dairy to our group of people in a very significant way that want to be supportive of insurance products too. And I'm hearing a lot more from our poultry folks, our swine folks, that they want to look at some of those things. And one of the things that also came with the cotton and dairy fix was a lift and a cap that was restricting really the ability for a lot of those new products for livestock to be developed. So I think that's a real positive benefit for the insurance industry.
Yeah, and I think if we can just kind of continue that trend and lift the restriction on those livestock producers being able to take advantage of Title I programs like MPP as well as crop insurance, I think that would be an additional benefit there.
So is the dairy insurance going to be widely used by the larger producers and MPP more by the smaller producers, or how will that break out?
Oh, I think that's hard to say. I think that, when we talked with a lot of the large dairy guys, they just didn't give a hoot about MPP. It wasn't something that they were willing to mess with. Certainly when the dairy deal was redone a couple of weeks ago, they made an effort to have more premium subsidies for the smaller producers, up to 5 million pounds of milk, so 220 cows or something. So they made it better, and I think it'll be interesting if the department reopens it for this year, if you see dairy producers actually getting in and deciding to take advantage of that or not. But I think you're going to see producers of all sizes looking towards an insurance program.
Yeah, it'll be very curious to see how much more nimble it is and how easy it is for folks to take advantage of and how those policies might look. LGM was incredibly cumbersome, right? You had to sign up on a specific day during the month. If you didn't get in quick enough, it might be out and over. You had all kinds of flexibility on how to do your feed costs in there. It's incredibly complicated. If you're a smaller producer or even a larger producer, it takes an incredible amount of time and a little bit of guessing game in order to actually take advantage of that tool. So I think there's a real positive here with this new policy coming out that will hopefully be a much better tool.
So let's switch a little bit to another hot topic, and that is trade. We have a question? Oh, Dick.
Oh, and Josh.
So the question is from Dick McWard on whether or not you have to have the understanding of what portion of the budget is devoted to nutrition before you can really understand what is available for the other titles.
So it's always like 76%, give or take a few percentage points of the budget. And right now, crop insurance is somewhere in the range of 9%, and commodities are somewhere around 7%, and conservation's around 7%, and everything else from rural development to research to beginning and young farmers is 1%. So I think you have to be really careful, though. I mean, you know, to take on the food stamp program, I know that there's probably a lot of people in this room who have frustrations with that. I might have some frustrations, but if you want to pass a farm bill, there's 42 million people plus on food stamps right now. I don't know how many farmers you think there are, if there's 1 million or 2 million or 500,000, but I don't want to, as a farmer, go up against 42 million SNAP recipients. I think that's a losing battle. And I think one other thing that you have to keep in mind is that if you look at the 435 members of the House, there's 55 of them that have 0 rural in their districts. That's not 0 farmers, that's 0 rural with small communities. So think about if we decide to, you know, make cuts in the SNAP program, how do you turn around and get any one of those 55 to ever think anything that you did for agriculture is a good thing? If you're from inner city New York, who cares about crop insurance or conservation or anything else? So I think the only way we pass a farm bill, especially through the House, is to continue to have agriculture and nutrition and conservation all work together.
I certainly agree with Mary Kay there, and would just add on to building on your point there. You know, this is not, though, without a lot of oversight. In fact, I mean, this last Congress, what was it, over 24 hearings, at least over 15 hearings, not sure exactly what the total number was, on nutrition alone, which is several times more hearings than they held on crop insurance and a lot of the other provisions in the Farm Bill. So the committee did an enormous amount of oversight into how is the program operating now, where are the potential areas where we can gain efficiencies or make better delivery of the program in general. And I think by and large, all of that testimony was showing that this is a program that is meeting the needs that it's designed to meet and is operating the way it's supposed to operate. So, but we'll have to wait and see what reforms that they may propose.
So my question is, why don't we rename the Farm Bill the Food and Agriculture or something else so that farm's not primary in that bill, and every 5 years we have to explain to all of our non-farm friends where the money's going?
Well, I don't think farm even appeared in the title of the 2014 Farm Bill, but lots of times it doesn't even appear. But it's sort of like if I said to you, here, let's talk about the food bill, then I'd have to say what I'm really saying is the farm. It's sort of like when I say SNAP, almost every time I still say food stamps because a lot of people don't know what SNAP is. So I hear what you're saying, but I don't know how to really accomplish that.
Yeah, we made several attempts back during the development of the 2008, and it even came up again during the development of 2014. I mean, there were attempts by members to try to talk about it as a food and farm bill, or talk about it in other terms. But the press, the general folks, they all see that, oh, this is what they're talking about is the Farm Bill. So it just all comes back to that.
I would admit it's somewhat of a guilty habit for several of us in the media to say Farm Bill because people do know what you're talking about. But I do remember Secretary Vilsack even trying to break his own staff. I think he had a kitty that every time someone said the word Farm Bill in his office, he made him make a donation to this jar or whatever in his office, trying to break that habit. And I hear he generated quite a bit of funding that way. Yes, sir. Also, to tag on that, crop insurance is a partnership between private farmers and the federal government. It's a private partnership, we're developing. And I don't know if it's sold like that in Washington. And also, the premiums we pay, our loss ratio is well under 1-to-1 for the last 4 years. There's a money left over at the surplus pile at the end of the day. It just disappears. It doesn't get put back into the kitty for a rainy day for when we really need it, like in 2012.
No, crop insurance has a fantastic story to tell, and so it makes our job easier as we're advocating for this important program, right? Having that private partnership there is critically important, and it also helps us to also demonstrate that the value of, or that some of these potential changes would have the effect of having companies leave, and therefore giving farmers fewer opportunities to take advantage of this, which then obviously impacts lending, et cetera. It's very much a cascading effect. So it very much helps us that we have a very good story to tell there, and it's one that I would say most of the groups in Washington around this issue collectively tell.
But trust me, I don't know a Washington lobbyist that talks about farm policy that doesn't say, when you're talking about crop insurance, that it is a cost share or a skin in the game type program, and sell it that way. And I would also say there's a tremendous coalition of like 100 groups that, everybody you can think of, from agents to companies to farm groups to fruit and vegetable groups to lenders to, the dairy industry, et cetera, that has been working together now for a year on crop insurance. So this is not something anybody in Washington is taking for granted or ignoring. It's just, it's a difficult issue to sell. I mean, one of the other things that I think is sort of different this farm bill than before is, before you had the right-wing people, the Heritage Foundation, the Taxpayers for Common Sense, who were battling at crop insurance, and you had the left-wing guys like the Environmental Working Group battling it, but they never really joined forces. And now they've joined forces, which makes them an even bigger hurdle to cross. So I think that's something that is going to make it even more difficult for it this year than it was 4 or 5 years ago.
Well, you touched on my point. The joke on Fox News Sunday was that the Heritage Foundation should enjoy this president, since they wrote most of his agenda that he's run through Congress. Do they see the risk? And, Obama came out and flipped Iowa and the upper Midwest, basically the ethanol belt. Do they see a risk in shooting their own foot off in doing that, or do they care, or do they think that far?
So the question is there a risk in going ahead and making the cuts in crop insurance?
Well, does the Heritage Foundation see, I would support them, except when they come after me. They need to be more and more of the time. I'm kind of, you jerk our chain once with the RFS, twice, the third time of it, after a period of time, we've had enough,
Yeah. So any thoughts on whether the Heritage Foundation has any remorse or concerns?
Well, first let me say that cautiously, the Heritage Foundation isn't all bad. Do they ever agree with us on anything on farm programs? No, but go on their website. They wrote a great paper about what happens if we lose NAFTA in agriculture. They've written really good things on the importance of immigration reform to agriculture and other sectors of the industry. So some of the things they actually do support us on. But I do think the Heritage Foundation has gotten a bit of a message because some of the conservative Republicans have turned against them, and they don't have quite the access, I would say, to some of those folks that they had a couple of years ago.
I think it's exceedingly dangerous that the administration is using the Heritage Foundation blueprint in their proposals. If they are doing it there, that means they are also doing it with some of the senators who share those views, as well as House members. Anytime that blueprint continues to become part of the legislative effort, I think is going to be dangerous, which is all the more reason why the collective coalition of groups is going to be ever vigilant in this space.
And it's not just Heritage on some of these criticisms. It's American Enterprise Institute, it's Taxpayers for Common Sense, and you mentioned Environmental Working Group. So there are a variety. Heritage gets quoted quite often. They're very prolific in their social media and their blogging and getting people on Sunday shows. I think there's another question back here. Yes, sir.
We heard this morning what the loss of TPP is going to do to our wheat exports and NAFTA, and the rhetoric is that, well, we're going to negotiate a better deal. Is there a better deal, or is that just rhetoric?
On TPP, whether we can get a better deal or not. I'm glad you brought that up, because I did want to make sure that we talked about trade. This is one of those issues where a lot of folks were very supportive in the agricultural community of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or TPP, but not all, including National Farmers Union. And I thought more interesting, the fact that President Trump as a candidate constantly called for withdrawal of TPP. I remember your boss, Roger Johnson, saying that flipped a lot of Democrats to support this president. So where do you see TPP right now?
Well, it's a bit of a mess, right? We all know that. But you know, a lot of, much to Sarah's comments here, for our members out there, they had the same frustrations with some of the trade agreements and the lack of enforcement in trade agreements, the overarching trade deficit that we have, not necessarily in agriculture, right, but in the rest of it, which has really kind of decimated a lot of our rural communities and so forth. Much of that red Trump space there came from folks who had lost jobs that were perceived to be lost anyway through a lot of the trade agreements. TPP was structured as, you know, a model that was going to be moving forward for future trade agreements. From our point of view, it really did not have the mechanisms in it to help stop some of the problems that we're seeing out there. One of the biggest ones that we see repeatedly by countries, China, et cetera, Vietnam, Malaysia, to mention a couple in the TPP, is currency manipulation. So you make a good deal with the country, right? You have a good deal in there. Suddenly the country devalues the currency by 10% to their advantage, to our disadvantage, and we're left hanging because there's no real protection in there to be able to do that. It's not that our members don't see the value and the importance of keeping strong, good markets and constantly looking for better agreements and keeping our market strong there. It's making sure that the agreements that we have right now, that we aren't repeating the same mistakes, that we are getting tougher with China, that we are trying to modernize agreements and always looking for something better there. We think that this president's message on that is flawed, but it's at least encouraging that he's trying to improve these agreements. Lighthizer out there trying to do his work with that. So we'll have to wait and see, right? But we're always going to be looking for ways to improve what we're currently dealing with.
This might be the issue Rob and I disagree on most. Probably so. I just think, pulling out of TPP was really a very sad day for farmers and ranchers. Certainly, I think we all still have to be on heightened alert about what's going to happen with NAFTA and whether we get pulled out of that. I think we're struggling big time by no longer seeming to make progress in the World Trade Organization, because really that would be where we could make the most progress. And, personally, I'm very concerned that this president said, okay, well, we don't need, multilaterals like TPP. We'll have bilaterals. Well, where are they? It's been 16 months. We need to move forward and get some trade moving. And I think, the 11 other countries that were in TPP have gone ahead without us. They got a deal. Now we're saying, oh, maybe we'll rejoin. I don't know. That would be kind of a miracle, I think, to rejoin and get much out of that. But I think with the amount of exports we have in this country on virtually every commodity, we have got to continue to do better in trade, or else our prices are going to continue to fall.
So how does the president put some of this back into, can you put it back into the genie back into the bottle here? There's discussions now about maybe we'll re-enter the Trans-Pacific Partnership in a different way, and maybe we call it the Trump-Pacific Partnership or something that, is more amenable to this administration. Can you do that and still keep the supporters that helped elect this new group, the Trump administration?
Well, from our perspective, we see the idea of picking back up TPP as inherently flawed, right? Because it is a model that is just replicating some of the same problems that we've had and that we are dealing with repeatedly with our trading partners. And yes, the threat of retaliation is always there, and it could be incredibly damaging to us. But if we aren't even willing to reframe and redevelop our trade agreements out there to prevent these in the first place, and to put more teeth in them, so that when we do have challenges, that we are able to deal with them effectively, then I think we are in a much worse place.
I hope they can figure out a way to pick up TPP and make it a win for us, but I don't have any ideas to offer them, Sarah.
Well, similar concerns around the North American Free Trade Agreement, or NAFTA, whether or not we're going to be able to stay in that. And I think Secretary Perdue has played a very key role in convincing the president that it's a good deal. He and others brought that discussion back from the brink. And the president and the negotiations are ongoing, as you know. But on the big ticket items, like, and I know we have some Canadian friends here in the audience, trying to reform the Canadian dairy system, trying to make sure that we have some significant improvements in trade with Mexico. Do you sense that we're making any progress on the big concerns for agriculture?
I don't sense we're making any progress on Canadian dairy, which I think most of our folks, I mean, poultry would say that's equally important to them, but I think that's the biggest issue that's hanging out there. But you know, I think we have to, when we think about NAFTA, there's a lot of commodities that we're already sending a whole lot of products to Canada and Mexico. So, you know, even if we can't fix dairy, I'd say don't screw up what we have with everybody else.
You know, while we certainly want to see greater access to U.S. dairy products into Canada, we also know that Canadian dairy farmers are doing just fine. And our dairy farmers in this country are bleeding money right now, and with no hope in sight, and that's for small and large producers. So there has to be a better way. So for us to sit here and try to destroy and tear down a system that is working internally for Canada, I think is the wrong approach.
Thank you. One other topic that, did you have, somebody else had a question? Oh, great, thank you.
All right, so before we get to that, I have kind of a two-part question. We've heard a lot about drones during the conference, a lot about autonomous vehicles, whether it be semi-trucks from Tesla or even possibilities of autonomous tractors. So are we talking about what drone regulation is going to do to agriculture, seeing as how it's projected from what I saw to be like $20 billion by 2026, which whether that number is true or not, I don't know, but still, big impact. And are we talking about autonomous vehicles and the impact they could have in the industry and the regulations involved in that?
So your question is what might be the regulatory impact on autonomous vehicles and drones? What do you know that you know, there's been ongoing regulations in the drone space for agriculture. I don't know that any new ones coming up on.
It's a really interesting question, one I'd love to know the answer to.
Yeah, I don't think I can impart any knowledge either, sorry.
You may have stumped the crowd, the panel here, but obviously, you know, I'm sure given all the regulatory removal emphasis of this administration, they're looking at repealing regulations versus adding new ones, but there is certainly a role for public safety regulations, so we'll have to look into that some more. Any other questions from the audience here? Our roving mic is around. Here, Josh, up front.
Hi, John Stevens from Penn State. So I was sitting in the Houston airport the other day, and Trump was talking about Harley Davidson motorcycles to India and how the tariffs went from 100% to 50%. And he said, "No, that's no good deal. Well, you know, I would like it down to minimum because we don't charge tariffs on theirs coming to ours." But what kind of do you foresee any good transactions coming about with that kind of hardballing? Because obviously our government is built on compromise and whatnot. We don't see it all that much too often, but how can we even go about the marketplace with such, you know, hardballing and not opening up options to gradual improvements?
Well, he's the negotiator in chief, right? But it does concern us when you're either disparaging one of our trading partners' citizens, or you're, you know, so at the same time, it is, you know, that rhetoric is becoming such the stream. I think it's all the more important then that we are looking at what it is that USTR, with Lighthizer leading that as our lead negotiator, what are those conversations going, and hopefully a lot of the that strong rhetoric there, those kind of tactics are just kind of flying it high in this space and just on the Twitter sphere.
Yep.
But go Penn State, by the way.
Shout out. Mary Kay, anything to add to that?
No. Can I ask the audience a question, though?
Sure.
So I'm really surprised that by now somebody hasn't stood up and said, are we going to get a farm bill this year? I think this might be...
Oh, you jumped
Okay.
in.
Go ahead.
Krista Swanson from Illinois, and that's what I was going to ask is, you guys both expressed strongly that Farm Bill markup was going to start in the coming weeks, but with the elections coming up and the potential turnover that you both talked about, what's the likelihood that we're going to get a Farm Bill this year versus in the next session of Congress?
I'll argue whatever you don't.
Okay.
Because I can do it either way.
So let me ask the crowd a question, and please be very honest about this. Who in this room has called one of their two senators or met with or their House member in the last 3 months and said, oh my God, the economy is bad, we really need a farm bill? So, going to get a farm bill? I don't know. I mean, I think I would have argued, and I've said many times, that I think this is a very different year than 2014. I think every ag rep in this room would tell you we struggled mightily to get members to really contact their congressman and say, we got to get this 2012 or 13 or 14 farm bill done because prices were just too darn good. They were busy doing something else. And I think because of the economy, the discussion started much earlier. People got interested much earlier. For a while, I saw lots of interaction. But I got to tell you, in the last couple of months, I don't hear anybody. I mean, I hear the question, going to get a farm bill? But you know what? You can't rely on us to get a farm bill for you. It's going to have to come. People in this room are going to have to say, we need to get it done. And I think that there is a much bigger risk that because we did the right thing and solved the cotton and dairy and livestock cap issue, that you could say, well, an extension would be okay. Jim McGovern said that not too long ago, We could wait till the Democrats take over the House, but, maybe we'll get a better deal that way. I would remind people in this room who have ARC that you're going to be stuck with that decision if you have an extension. You are not going to have the option to get ARC to be a better program or to switch to PLC. So people in this room, I think, ought to be very concerned about what might happen with the simple extension. But I guarantee you, Congress doesn't do anything. So if we're not all standing up saying, hey, guys, yep, we're concerned about NAFTA. Yes, we're concerned about RFS. But, man, we got to have a better farm bill, too. We're not going to get it.
Yeah, so short answer is I don't know, right? That's what everybody would say here. But I think at this point, I would still say it's likely. I think there is still the momentum, there's the drive in the House. We do anticipate action starting as early as March. If it certainly could slide. There's always things that can arise, floor time, et cetera, all those kinds of other pressures. So it could slide into April and so forth, but there's a desire to get that done very soon. Now, when that would move to the floor, I think would be a much bigger question and involves a lot of other issues going on in the House. In the Senate, obviously they're on a different track. They have a lot of other things. We still have nominees that need to be nominated, for USDA and then ultimately be dealt with and so forth. So it would be a few months later. I think the challenge becomes if the Senate and the House are unable to get to the point where they've each finished it before we get into late summer, so by July there's not like a real clear path, then I think you're getting dangerously close to election cycle and campaigns. And if it looks like one body or the other or both might be potentially flipping, you would then begin to get the arguments that, it'll be better if we wait and so forth. But I think for those Senate Democratic members that are up from Trump states that are wanting, that are also on the Ag Committee and so forth, they want to get a farm bill done, right? So I think there still is enough pressure out there to make it happen. And hopefully it won't be 3 years like the last time.
Oh, yes. So we're running out of time here. I just wanted to ask two more quick questions. One is on tax reform. We did see some movement. We've got a lot of changes in people who are getting paychecks and a lot of things that maybe are a little still in flux on 199A. But I'd like to ask the audience in a show of hands, how many of you think that you're going to pay less in taxes as a result of the tax reform that passed? Anybody? No, quite a few. All right, and in honor of our sponsor, John Deere, how many of you are going to use that money to buy equipment? Well, Steve, you got a little work to do here. So, well, thank you, everyone, and thanks our panelists. Please join me in showing our appreciation to Rob and Mary Kay.